once you start taking sides based on certain political parties and their agendas, then truth starts to become a casualty. And I think right now in Pakistan, we are at a stage where traditional media is losing a lot of its credibility, and as a result, losing a lot of its audience. And I think those times where journalists and editors considered themselves as gatekeepers, as people who thought that they knew what people should really read. I think those days are now slowly disappearing into the fog of history. I've had a very interesting educational background. I've moved quite a bit, and my first 7 classes, like till class 7th, I changed at least 10 different schools in 10 different cities because my father was in the army. So we were moving every year. But after that, in class 7th, I went to boarding school in HSN College, Lahore, and I was there from class 7th till my A levels. And then after that, I went to the United States to do my undergraduate. I finished the 4-year degree in economics and international relations. And then I came back to work here in Pakistan as a journalist. And then after a couple of years after that, then I went back to do my master's again in the US at Columbia University Journalism School, where I did a master's in television journalism. So that's my educational background. Well, when I came back after my undergrad, I started working for this newspaper called The Muslim here in Islamabad, which was one of the finest papers we've had. Unfortunately, it had to close down in later years. When I started reporting, first I was a sub-editor at The Muslim, and then after a year or two when I joined The Nation, I started reporting. I was also covering the Foreign Office, so I was doing a international relations kind of coverage also, which took me to Afghanistan and many other places. I ended up covering politics. I used to cover the parliament as well as political parties. So I was doing these two things in parallel. And then this is, I'm talking early 90s, so there was so much happening in Islamabad in terms of politics and the contest between People's Party and PMLN and governments changing every couple of years. At that time, when there was no TV, only the print media, the profession as a foremost priority for a number of people wasn't there. So yes, it was a very unconventional choice. And when I was coming back from the US, I was probably the only one, not only in my social circle, but also probably in my class and group of friends who chose this profession. Because at that particular time, there were a couple of professions which everybody aimed to join. One was, of course, the corporate sector, then there was engineering, medicine, government service, CSS, perhaps the armed forces. But journalism wasn't, at least not even in the top 10. So it was an unconventional choice. I think the most challenging so far was when I was starting a new channel, which we were starting from ground zero. And I did not have an experience in that. I mean, I had worked for a number of years as a reporter or a columnist or as an editor, but putting together a channel as the editorial head of the channel, news channel, was something which I was learning on the job. Luckily, because I had about 15 years of journalism under my belt, so I could draw upon that. But the whole skill set that went into putting together an entire project was a very time consuming an energy consuming one. And this I'm talking about express television channel. So we started that in, I joined in 2006. We launched the channel in 2008, and then I remained associated with them over a period of nearly a decade. So I think that was the very, very challenging period. I spent a couple of days, about 10 days in 2006, going to Beirut, to Lebanon, when the war, when Israel had launched a full-scale war against them. And that period also was very, very rewarding for me professionally, because, we were on alien territory. We didn't have the kind of support that you have here in terms of your organization. You're pretty much on your own in an environment where there's an active conflict going on. So I really learned a lot. There was a lot of danger involved also, but that's how you learn. So for me, I think that was one of the most challenging tasks that I've done. We were two of us, the cameraman and myself, and we I was working for ARY that time. And we were traveling we were stationed in Beirut, and then we had to go down to the southern part of Lebanon, where the actual fighting was going on at that time, a city called Tyre. So we planned to go there, spend the day there, come back. We hired a car and a driver, and we drove down. It was, I think, about a 6-7 hours drive. So we went there, and we did what we had to do in terms of coverage. But later on, we realized that we couldn't go back, because there was a bridge between connecting the Beirut to the south of the country, which was blown up while we were there, and there was no way going back. So we were stuck there, and we were stuck in an active conflict area with no support. We had not brought enough material with us. I had even forgotten my cell phone charger, and there was no way to contact anybody else. So for about 3 to 4 days, we were stuck there. We couldn't move out. The Israeli planes were bombing there. They were hitting targets there, and we had no place to stay. We were running out of money. We had no place to sleep, so we were sleeping, on the beach, on sand, and we woken up by the sounds of bombs being hurled at different Hezbollah targets. So that was a very tough time, and we were still reporting from there. We were able to report because we had our basic equipment with us, and we were able to shoot stuff and even do some rough edits and send them back. So that was, I think, a very, very difficult time, and the way that we got out was also very there's a lot of threat, because we were advised not to travel, because the moment we went on the roads, there was a risk that Israeli drones would hit us. But since we had run out of everything, we had to take the risk. So we kind of drove, and it was a lot of threat there. And it was it took us about 2 hours to somehow manage to make our way back from that particular river where the bridge had been blown up, and they had made a makeshift way to cross that river, which we were able to with great difficulty under a lot of threat. So that was a very remarkable and memorable professional trip. It was a very interesting trip because at that particular time, India and Pakistan relations were blowing hot and cold. It was only a couple of years back that the two countries had come nearly to war. The armies had moved to the frontline location, but after that, General Musharraf had tried to make some peace overtures, and he was, of course, a very popular person in India. So when we went there, it was a great learning experience to be able to see how the two countries, who mortal enemies, were trying to somehow find a space between their difficult relations and inject an element of normalcy. And of course, General Musharraf, wherever he went, he was greeted like a rock star. But at the same time, of course, there was a lot of animosity and tension also, which was palpable. So for a journalist, of course, it was almost like having a ringside to history, and reporting on that was in many ways very rewarding. I think the interview that you mentioned, I did with the former president Shimon Peres. It was my first interview when I had joined Geo Television here in Pakistan. This was, I believe, 2003. And the reason why it was very challenging was not only because of the content, but also because this was the first ever time that a Pakistani journalist was interviewing such a senior person from Israel, and a Pakistani news organization was willing to air that interview. So it was a very challenging time in the larger context, and we weren't even sure after the interview had been conducted whether there would be any problems and whether it would actually be able to go on air. Well, I think absolutely journalism is in a very transformative stage. I think we've the move from print to electronic and to digital is now a very clear linear path. I think print as a medium is losing audiences, even though it is gaining audiences from its digital format. Electronic television also, of course, still in countries like Pakistan is very popular. But if you look at the trajectory in the future, I think television is also on its way down, especially in terms of younger demographics. And of course, this whole migration from print and electronic is moving towards the digital media. I do believe that that is where the future lies. It is going to synergize the written word, the spoken word, the visual word, all into one medium, which is going to be digital. And I think both in terms of storytelling, in terms of information, also in terms of interactivity, digital is absolutely the future. And I think anybody who does not uh, get themselves more comfortable with this future are going to have a tough time maintaining their relevance in the media. I think for journalism, for good journalism, there are two kind of qualities that people should have. One, of course, is the craft of journalism. You need to know the skills that go into telling a good story. Whether it is the written word or the spoken word or the digital platform, you need to be good at those skills. You need to be able to write well, speak well, edit well, shoot well. All of these things are important. And if you don't know how to do that, then you're missing out on something. The second part is knowing why we are doing journalism. I think that's very, very important. What is it that drives journalism? And I think if somebody doesn't have a certain fuel in him or her to do journalism, then it becomes a job. And journalism as a job doesn't work out, because it then is devoid of the kind of meaning that is essential to propel journalism forward and to actually add value to it. So I think so essentially, A, knowing why you want to do journalism, and B, then having the skills necessary to be able to translate that passion into actual journalism. These two skills are key. If anybody has them, then I think there's nothing stopping him or her. Well, in Pakistan, I think we've had a long list of people who've really done and continue to do very solid journalism, both in television and in print. I think in television there are a couple of people. I believe my colleague Asma Shirazi from Aaj Television. I think she's doing wonderful journalism, because again, I think she imbues in her these two qualities that I mentioned. I think she knows why she does journalism. She has a lot of passion, and then she's able to translate that passion into effective journalism through television and also through writing. So she's somebody who's doing it very well. I think there are some other people in the past who've also done wonderful journalism. One of my first teachers, my first bosses when I joined the Muslim was Mr. ABS Jafri. I think he was the old school journalist, the traditional journalist that we've always admired, and I learned a lot from him. Somebody who's absolutely focused on this profession, and who really had an eye for not just for the right word, but also the way that that word was used in a larger context. So, two names that I can think of immediately. Well, I mean, it doesn't put me under a lot of pressure. It does put me in a different kind of pressure, which is to be able to produce quality on a regular basis, which is very difficult. Now, Red Zone files has really garnered a lot of readership both here in Pakistan and also abroad. And I think one of the reasons why it has done so is because in that column I try and give information, not just simple analysis or opinion, and that requires a lot of work. That requires a lot of legwork. I have to be constantly meeting people, getting information, getting a better understanding, acquiring information that then needs to be checked, double checked, triple checked to make sure there is no problem in its authentication. So that one column requires a lot of work, as opposed to a simple opinion column, which also requires a lot of work. But that's more like you're sitting there and you're using your own ideas and thoughts to pen down a piece. But the Red Zone Files one is actually a combination of traditional hardcore reporting and analysis, and that requires a bit of work. And I think that is probably one of the reasons why it has garnered a fair amount of readership. Well, that's a difficult question. But I think, in terms of what I've done is that last couple of years, I've really tried to document the happenings here in Islamabad, in the power corridors inside the Red Zone. And I think the Red Zone's column is a good narration of the PTI years here in Islamabad, because I started it when the PTI government was here, and it continues till today, although it is now moving to another platform. But I think it has also provided me a good window into how the PTI government has worked, and in many cases why it hasn't worked. In Pakistan, the media is absolutely polarized, and I think we should absolutely worry about it. The problem that has happened is that uh, here in Pakistan, the media has decided to take partisan sides, not based on any particular ideology, but in terms of likes and dislikes of certain political parties. Of course, the media is also polarized in the US or the UK or other more mature media markets, but the nature of polarization is different. If you're a conservative leaning newspaper or a media organization in the US, for example, then you are linked to a certain ideology. You're not linked to personal vested interests. Here, unfortunately, for a number of reasons, our divisions are based more on crude factors. And what that has done is that it has impacted the field of journalism negatively, because once you start taking sides based on certain political parties and their agendas, then truth starts to become a casualty. And I think right now in Pakistan, we are at a stage where traditional media is losing a lot of its credibility, and as a result, losing a lot of its audience. At some point, I think it will need to be reversed. Otherwise, we run the risk of alienating a very large number of young people who are the consumers of the media for not only today, but especially for tomorrow. Well, I think the media is going through a huge challenge. This is probably one of the toughest times for the media, not just Pakistan, but all over the world. And the primary reason is that the entire business model of the media industry is fragmenting. This revolution that is happening in front of our eyes, the shift from traditional media to digital media and social media, is not only is it changing the technological requirements of the industry, it is also splintering, fragmenting the audience, and therefore making it very difficult for traditional media houses and traditional journalists to be able to do their traditional craft and still find the kind of audience that they are used to. This is a major, major transformation that is taking place, and I think in the coming years, more and more journalism is going to be user driven, viewer driven, reader driven, and I think those times where journalists and editors considered themselves as gatekeepers, as people who thought that they knew what people should really read. I think those days are now slowly disappearing into the fog of history. And what we are looking at is a changed model for journalism where the editors and journalists will have to pay more and more attention on what the readers want and how they want it. So I have a very strong affinity to the written word. And the reason I'll give you a couple of reasons. One, I just feel that writing brings you the kind of mental discipline that mere speaking doesn't. I do television also, both as a talk show host and also as a political commentator, and that has its own advantages. Of course, the primary one being that you have a much wider audience. But when you're writing, I think you are able to express your own thoughts much more clearly. You're able to formulate your thoughts with greater depth. It takes greater mental discipline to be able to put a thought together, to put a sentence together, and to find the right kind of words and the combination of words to truly express what you're thinking. So I think far more effort goes into the written word. And now with the rapid growth of digital media, I believe that the written word is becoming more and more stronger than ever. And in some ways, today I feel that it is even stronger than the spoken word, television, because it goes far and wide, especially if you're writing in an international language. It goes immediately, and I think it has the kind of staying power which a video clip doesn't. So I think my first preference is that. However, because of local audiences, of course, being on the electronic media has its own advantages.